What would you do if the person you trusted most shattered every vow they ever made? My name is Mark, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife's betrayal and the aftermath that unfolded. 15 years ago, Amy and I embarked on our journey together by tying the knot after enjoying 3 truly wonderful years of dating. Our story began during her sophomore year in college, where we first crossed paths in the university library. She was seated by the window, bathed in the golden glow of the afternoon sun, her head bent over a thick textbook. I remember hesitating for a moment before approaching her, unsure of how to begin a conversation with someone so effortlessly captivating. When I finally mustered the courage to introduce myself, her warm smile disarmed me entirely. That day marked the beginning of countless study sessions, shared coffee breaks, and long conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Amy had a way of making the mundane feel extraordinary. Whether it was a trip to the grocery store or a quiet walk through the campus gardens, her enthusiasm was infectious. She was ambitious, driven, and full of dreams that inspired me to dream bigger for myself. Together, we imagined a future filled with love, shared adventures, and the pursuit of goals that felt limitless. It was as if we had found a perfect rhythm, one that made everything else fade into the background. The foundation of our relationship seemed unshakable, a fortress built on trust, laughter, and a sense of partnership that felt destined to withstand the test of time. When we decided to get married, it felt like the most natural progression of our love story. The wedding was a modest yet heartfelt affair. Surrounded by close friends and family, we exchanged vows in a picturesque garden under the soft glow of fairy lights. I remember the way Amy looked that day, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy as she promised to love and cherish me forever. In that moment, I truly believed that nothing could ever come between us. However, looking back, I now realize that even the strongest structures can have unseen cracks. At the time, I was blissfully unaware of the subtle signs that would later take on greater significance. There were moments when Amy would deflect deeper conversations about our future or brush aside minor disagreements with a dismissive laugh. I convinced myself these were normal quirks of a relationship, too minor to warrant concern. Little did I know, those seemingly trivial moments were the first whispers of a storm brewing on the horizon. Just 6 months after we exchanged our vows and promised to support each other through thick and thin, we found ourselves at a lively barbecue gathering with friends. The atmosphere was relaxed and cheerful, filled with the scent of grilled meats, the sound of clinking glasses, and the hum of casual conversations. It was one of those rare evenings where time seemed to slow down, allowing us to simply enjoy the company of those we cared about. As the night wore on, someone brought up the concept of a celebrity hall pass. The conversation began innocently enough, with everyone joking about their childhood crush or current celebrity infatuations. Laughter filled the air as names like Brad Pitt and Scarlett Johansson were thrown around. However, what started as a harmless joke quickly took on a tone that felt uncomfortably real. The idea of giving your spouse a free pass to indulge in a one-time fling with a celebrity sparked debates that seemed to blur the lines of commitment. I laughed along with the group, but a knot of unease formed in my stomach. The notion felt fundamentally at odds with the promises Amy and I had made to each other. As I glanced at her, she seemed to be enjoying the conversation, her laughter ringing out with the same carefree spirit I had always loved. Then, almost playfully, she nudged me and said, "Come on, Mark, you must have someone in mind. It's just a game." Her words were lighthearted, but they landed with an unexpected weight. For the first time, I found myself questioning the strength of the bond we had worked so hard to build. Was it possible that she saw our commitment as something flexible, something open to interpretation? The thought unsettled me, casting a shadow over what had been an otherwise perfect evening. Later that night, as we drove home, I brought up the topic again. "Did you really mean what you said about the hall pass?" I asked, my voice tinged with a hesitation I couldn't quite mask. Amy chuckled, waving her hand dismissively. "Of course not. It's just a silly game people play to keep things interesting." Her response should have reassured me, but instead, it left me with more questions than answers. Was it truly a joke, or had it revealed something deeper about her perspective on relationships? I tried to brush off my concerns, convincing myself that I was overthinking. After all, Amy and I had always been open and honest with each other. Surely, a lighthearted conversation at a barbecue couldn't hold any real significance. Underscore. In the days that followed, I found myself revisiting the moment over and over again. It wasn't just the idea of the hall pass that bothered me, it was the ease with which Amy had embraced it. While I struggled to articulate why it had struck a nerve, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had opened a door to complications we had never anticipated. It was as if a seed of doubt had been planted. I can see how small cracks began to form beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. What felt like minor disagreements or fleeting moments of unease were, in reality, signs of deeper issues that we failed to address. We were so caught up in the whirlwind of love and the demands of building a life together that we overlooked the importance of truly understanding each other's values and boundaries. The memory of that barbecue remains etched in my mind, not just because of the unease it brought, but because it marked the first time I questioned the uncheckable trust I had always placed in Amy. It was a fleeting moment, but its impact would ripple through the years, setting the stage for the challenges that would eventually test our marriage to its breaking point. Fast forward 15 years. Amy and I had built a family with 2 beautiful children, Emily, our spirited 12-year-old who loved painting and dreamed of becoming an artist, and Ethan, our 8-year-old son who was as curious about the world as he was mischievous. On the surface, our life seemed idyllic. We had a comfortable home in the suburbs, family trips to the coast every summer, and countless cherished memories etched into photo albums lining our living room shelves. But beneath the veneer of contentment lay the subtle strains of a marriage tested by time and circumstance. Over the years, we had grown apart in ways that felt almost imperceptible until moments of tension made them glaringly obvious. Amy's career in marketing demanded frequent travel, leaving me to juggle work and parenting duties alone more often than I cared to admit. Meanwhile, my own career as an architect often left me feeling isolated, buried under deadlines and detached from the creative spark that had once fueled my passion. We were like 2 parallel lines moving in the same direction, but never quite intersecting. Underscore. One fateful Thursday night, while Amy was attending a conference in Los Angeles, the fault lines in our relationship became impossible to ignore. It was nearing midnight when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Seeing Amy's name on the screen brought a mix of relief and curiosity. I assumed she was calling to check in, perhaps to share a funny anecdote from her day or say goodnight to the kids. Instead, her slurred voice, barely audible over the pounding bass of nightclub music, jolted me awake. "You won't believe it, Mark," she exclaimed, her words tumbling over one another in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "I met Joshua Morrow from my favorite soap opera, he's amazing. And I'm going to use my hall pass." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. It felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me disoriented and grasping for stability. Before I could utter a word, the line went dead, the call ending abruptly as if to punctuate the surrealness of her statement. I stared at the phone, my mind racing to process what I had just heard. Underscore. The hours that followed were a blur of rising panic and helpless frustration. I tried calling her back repeatedly, each unanswered ring amplifying the knot of dread in my stomach. My thoughts spiraled into worst-case scenarios. Was she in danger? Had she been drinking too much? And then, the most unthinkable question of all, had she truly meant what she said about using her hall pass? The memory of that long-ago barbecue resurfaced with chilling clarity. The light-hearted joke that now felt like a harbinger of something far darker. Sleep was impossible. I paced the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The house felt eerily silent, the usual comfort of its familiarity replaced by an oppressive sense of foreboding. Every so often, I would glance at the framed photographs of our family. Amy smiling as she held a squirming toddler Emily, Ethan perched on my shoulders during a hike, the 4 of us laughing together on a carousel. Each image was a stark reminder of what was at stake and of how fragile it all suddenly felt. By the time dawn broke, my anxiety had transformed into a steely resolve. I needed answers. I couldn't sit idle by, consumed by speculation and fear. Amy had always been the more impulsive one in our relationship, her spontaneity one of the things that had drawn me to her in the first place. But this felt different. This felt like a betrayal of the unspoken trust that had held us together through countless challenges. Underscore. Desperate for clarity, I reached out to Jack, a close friend and the husband of Amy's colleague Jenny, who had accompanied her to the conference. Jack was as shocked as I was when I recounted the midnight call. That doesn't sound like Amy at all, he said, his voice laced with disbelief, but Jenny might know more. Let me talk to her and see what I can find out. An hour later, Jack called back with an update that sent a cold shiver down my spine. Jenny had admitted that Amy had been enamored by a man she believed to be Joshua Morrow. They had met at the conference's after-party, where drinks flowed freely and inhibitions were abandoned. Jenny's account was vague, but the implications were damning. Amy had left the party with him, declaring it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My worst fears had been confirmed, and yet, there was a part of me that clung to the hope that there was some misunderstanding, some plausible explanation that would restore my faith in the woman I had loved for so many years. But deep down, I knew the truth. The seeds of doubt sown all those years ago had finally borne fruit, their roots entangled in the foundation of our marriage. When Amy returned home that weekend, her demeanor was unsettlingly casual. She breezed through the door, her face lit with a radiant smile as she set her suitcase down and embraced the kids. "I missed you all so much," she exclaimed, her voice filled with genuine warmth. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if the stress and sleep deprivation had conjured a narrative that wasn't real. But then, as we sat down for dinner, she began recounting her trip with a giddy enthusiasm that felt almost cruel in its obliviousness. "You'll never believe who I met," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Joshua Morrow. He was so charming and down-to-earth. It was incredible." Her words felt like daggers, each one driving deeper into the wound that had been festering since Thursday night. She spoke as if she were recounting a harmless celebrity encounter, utterly blind to the turmoil raging within me. It was then that I realized the extent of her detachment, the chasm that had grown between us over the years. I couldn't bring myself to confront her that night. The kids were there, their innocent chatter a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my heart. But as I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew that the conversation we needed to have could no longer be avoided. The woman I had once trusted with every fiber of my being had crossed a line that could never be erased, and I had no choice but to face the reality of what our marriage had become. Desperate for answers, I found myself turning to the only person who might have insight into what had truly happened to our mutual friend Jack. Jack's wife, Jenny, had accompanied Amy to the conference, and I hoped she might shed some light on the unsettling events of that Thursday night. It was a difficult call to make, knowing that I would have to navigate not only my emotions but also Jenny's loyalty to Amy. "Mark, this doesn't sound like Amy," Jack said when I explained the situation. "I can't imagine she'd do something like that, but I'll talk to Jenny and see if she knows anything." A part of me wanted to believe Jack's reassurances, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Hours later, he called back, his voice hesitant. "Jenny isn't saying much, but from what I gather, Amy met someone at the after-party." She didn't tell Jenny much either, just that it was significant, and satisfied with the vagueness of Jack's update, I decided to contact Jenny directly. I knew it was a risk. Her loyalty to Amy might make her reluctant to share details, but desperation has a way of overriding hesitation. Using a voice recording app on my phone, I called her and tried to mask my frustration with a calm demeanor. "Jenny," I began, "I'm not trying to involve you in something uncomfortable, but I need to know what happened at the conference. Amy called me, and what she said. I just need to know the truth." Jenny hesitated, her voice wavering. "Mark, I don't think it's my place to say anything. You should talk to Amy about this." "I've tried," I replied, my voice firm but not aggressive, "but she won't be honest with me." "Please, Jenny, I need to know." There was a long silence before she finally spoke, her words slow and deliberate. She left the after-party with someone. A man. She told me it was Joshua Morrow, the actor from her favorite show. She was so excited. "Mark," she kept saying, "it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Hearing those words aloud felt like a punch to the gut. My worst fears were confirmed. "Did she tell you what happened after that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," Jenny replied, "but she didn't come back to the hotel until the next morning." I didn't ask questions. I thought it was better that way. Amy returned home that weekend as if nothing had happened. The moment she walked through the door, her face lit up with a smile that felt both familiar and foreign. "I missed you all so much," she exclaimed, embracing the kids with a warmth that seemed genuine. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had imagined the entire ordeal. Could I have misunderstood? Could the call have been a drunken exaggeration, nothing more? But as the evening progressed, my doubts were laid to rest in the most excruciating way possible. After the kids were asleep, Amy poured herself a glass of wine and sat down across from me. Her expression was one of excitement, the kind you'd expect from someone eager to share a wonderful story. "You'll never believe who I met," she began, her voice tinged with giddiness. "Joshua Morrow. He was at the conference after party, and we hit it off instantly. He's so down to earth, Mark. It was incredible." I sat silently, my mind racing. She continued to recount the encounter in vivid detail, her words flowing with the ease of someone reliving a cherished memory. She described their conversations, his charm, and how it felt surreal to meet someone she had admired on screen for years. "And then," I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, "what happened after the party?" Amy hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face. But it was brief, quickly replaced by her usual nonchalance. "We just talked for a while," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It was nothing serious." Her attempt at downplaying the situation only fueled my anger. I couldn't believe she thought I would accept such a vague explanation, especially after everything I had learned. The trust we had spent years building now felt like a fragile illusion, shattered by her casual disregard for our marriage. In the days that followed, Amy continued to act as if everything was normal. She showed no signs of guilt or remorse, her demeanor light and carefree. Meanwhile, I was drowning in a sea of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. The person I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for years, now felt like a stranger. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but replay Jenny's words in my mind. She called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The phrase echoed like a cruel taunt, a reminder of how little she valued the vows we had made to each other. Unable to let the matter rest, I decided to confront her one evening. The kids were in bed, the house quiet except for the sound of the wind rustling the trees outside. "Amy," I began, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what happened at the conference." She looked up from her phone, her expression wary. "What about it?" she asked. "I know you left with someone," I said, watching her closely. "And I know you called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Is that how you see our marriage?" Something to set aside for a fleeting thrill, her eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely surprised, but the surprise quickly turned to defensiveness. "Mark, it wasn't like that," she said, her tone dismissive. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting," I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "You left with another man, Amy. Do you even understand what that means?" "What it's done to us, it didn't mean anything," she insisted, her voice tinged with frustration. "It was just a chance to meet someone I've admired for years. It's not like I fell in love with him." Her words felt like a slap in the face. The way she downplayed her actions, as if they were insignificant, only deepened the chasm between us. "Whether you loved him or not doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that you betrayed my trust. You made a choice, Amy, and now we have to deal with the consequences." That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized that our marriage would never be the same. The cracks that had been forming for years had finally given way, leaving nothing but broken pieces in their place. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The person I had trusted most in the world had let me down in a way I could never have imagined. And perhaps, deep down, I knew this was the beginning of the end. Unable to contain my emotions, I confronted Amy the night after she returned. The kids were asleep, and the house was cloaked in a heavy silence that seemed to magnify the tension in the air. I stood in the doorway of the living room, watching as she unpacked her suitcase with an ease that felt almost mocking. Each folded item of clothing, each casual movement, only deepened the knot of anger and betrayal that churned inside me. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I finally asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to remain calm. The words cut through the quiet like a blade, stopping her in her tracks. She turned to face me, her expression one of confusion mixed with irritation, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "What are you talking about, Mark?" she replied, her tone exasperated. I stepped closer, the weight of my emotions threatening to spill over. "The call, Amy. The one where you told me you were going to use your hall pass. Do you even understand what that means, what it's done to us?" Her reaction was as dismissive as it was infuriating. She shrugged, her demeanor disturbingly nonchalant. It wasn't cheating, Mark. It was just a hall pass, she said, her voice calm, as if she truly believed that statement absolved her of any wrongdoing. Underscore. For a moment, I was speechless, caught between disbelief and fury. How could she dismiss something so deeply hurtful as if it were a trivial misunderstanding? A hall pass, I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. Do you hear yourself? You're excusing what you did because of some ridiculous joke we laughed about years ago at a barbecue. You think that makes it okay? Amy rolled her eyes, a gesture that ignited a fire within me. Mark, you're blowing this out of proportion. It was a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything, I shot back, my anger finally breaking free. It meant enough for you to call me, drunk and excited, to brag about it. It meant enough for you to forget the vows we made to each other, to love, honor, and cherish. Do those words mean nothing to you? Her face hardened, and for the first time, her composure faltered. I don't see why you're making this such a big deal, she said, her tone defensive. It's not like I ran off with someone behind your back. I told you about it. That should count for something. The audacity of her justification left me reeling. Telling me doesn't make it right. Amy, I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. You didn't even think about how it would affect me, or what it says about the kind of respect or lack thereof you have for this marriage. Underscore. She crossed her arms, her body language defiant. Respect, she echoed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Don't lecture me about respect, Mark. You've spent years putting work ahead of us, barely paying attention to what I need. I finally did something for myself, and now you're acting like I'm the villain. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. This wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about years of unspoken resentment, of unmet needs and unacknowledged sacrifices. But instead of taking responsibility for her actions, she was turning the blame on me, weaponizing our past to justify her choices. So this is my fault now, I asked, my voice quieter but no less intense. You're saying that because I worked hard to provide for this family, I somehow gave you permission to throw away everything we've built. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I'm saying it wasn't as black and white as you're making it out to be, she said softly. Maybe if you'd been more present, I wouldn't have felt the need to. I don't know, find something exciting. Underscore. Her admission cut deeper than any of her previous words. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. The love that had once been so strong, so uncheckable, had eroded under the weight of unmet expectations and unspoken grievances. But even in that moment of clarity, I couldn't ignore the truth. Amy had made a choice to prioritize her own fleeting excitement over the sanctity of our marriage, over the trust we had spent years building. And now, she stood before me, unwilling to take full responsibility for the damage she had caused. I can't do this, Amy, I said finally, my voice trembling with a mix of sadness and resolve. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when you clearly don't see what you've done as a betrayal. If you can't acknowledge how much this has hurt me, how much it's broken us, then I don't see how we can move forward. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, a hint of panic crept into her voice. You don't mean that, do you? She asked, stepping closer. Mark, we've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away over one mistake. I shook my head, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. I'm not the one throwing it away, Amy. You did that the moment you decided our vows didn't matter. The moment you chose a fleeting thrill over the life we built together. Underscore. The conversation ended with a silence that was deafening. Amy retreated to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of our argument. As I sat there, staring at the framed photo of our wedding day on the mantel, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. The woman in that photograph, the one who had looked at me with so much love and promise, felt like a stranger now. Over the next few days, our interactions were strained and awkward, filled with unspoken tension and half-hearted attempts at normalcy. Amy seemed to think that time would heal the rift between us, that I would eventually forgive and forget. But the cracks in our relationship had grown too deep, and no amount of time could erase the pain of her betrayal. I began to realize that the person I had once trusted with my heart was no longer the same. And perhaps neither was I, with Amy refusing to acknowledge her wrongdoing. I realized that words alone would not suffice. She had wrapped herself in a veil of denial, dismissing my pain as an overreaction and deflecting responsibility with excuses that only deepened my sense of betrayal. It was clear that if I wanted the truth to come to light, I would have to uncover it myself. Late one night, while Amy was asleep, I began my search for evidence. I felt a mix of guilt and resolve as I opened her laptop, knowing that invading her privacy was not something I ever imagined doing. But desperate times called for desperate measures. I scrolled through her emails and messages, looking for anything that might confirm my suspicions. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary: work emails, reminders for the kids' school activities, and mundane exchanges with friends. Then I found it, a folder buried deep within her email drafts. Inside were photographs of Amy with the man she believed to be Joshua Morrow. In one, they were smiling and holding cocktails, her face alight with a glow I hadn't seen in years. In another, they were leaning in close, his hand resting on her lower back in a way that made my stomach churn. Alongside the photos were several explicit messages, their contents leaving no doubt about the nature of their encounter. My hands trembled as I saved the evidence to a USB drive. Each click of the mouse felt like a dagger to my heart, the reality of her betrayal becoming more undeniable with every image and message. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the joy she seemed to take in it, the way she had allowed herself to be swept away without a thought for the consequences. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer, Sarah, a no-nonsense professional known for her meticulous attention to detail and unyielding pursuit of justice. I handed her the USB drive, explaining the situation in as much detail as I could manage without breaking down. Sarah listened intently, her sharp eyes narrowing as she reviewed the evidence. "This is strong," she said, her tone clinical but reassuring. "We can use this to build a solid case. But I'll need more if we're going to expose her lies in court." She suggested I gather witness statements and any additional proof that could corroborate my claims. Reluctantly, I reached out to Jack and Jenny, hoping they would be willing to speak the truth. Jack, ever the loyal friend, agreed immediately, but Jenny was more hesitant. Her initial responses were evasive, her loyalty to Amy creating an obstacle I hadn't anticipated. Determined, I pressed on. One evening, I recorded a phone call with Jenny, during which she inadvertently revealed key details about the night in question. "Amy thought it was her big chance," she said, her voice tinged with regret. She was so caught up in the moment. "I didn't think it would go this far." Her words confirmed everything I had feared. With the recorded call added to my growing collection of evidence, Sarah and I felt ready to proceed. The courtroom was a cold, intimidating space, its walls lined with dark wood panels that seemed to absorb the tension in the air. Amy and Jenny sat at the defendant's table, their faces stoic, while Sarah and I took our places across from them. The judge, a stern woman with an air of authority, began the proceedings by addressing the allegations. Amy and Jenny both testified under oath, adamantly denying any wrongdoing. Their stories were carefully aligned, painting a picture of innocence that might have been convincing had I not been armed with the truth. Amy claimed that the photographs were taken out of context, that the messages were fabricated, and that the entire situation was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But Sarah was relentless. When it was her turn to present our case, she began with the photographs, displaying them on a large screen for everyone in the courtroom to see. Gasps rippled through the audience as each image appeared, the undeniable intimacy between Amy and the man shattering her claims of innocence. Then came the recorded phone call with Jenny. The courtroom fell silent as her voice played over the speakers, her own words condemning both herself and Amy. She called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Jenny's voice echoed, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the room. The final blow came when Sarah revealed the man's true identity. He was not Joshua Morrow, as Amy had believed, but a lookalike with a sordid history of targeting married women. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, Amy's humiliation written all over her face. She buried her head in her hands, unable to meet the eyes of anyone present. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. In light of the overwhelming evidence, Amy was found guilty of breaching the terms of our prenuptial agreement. She lost custody of our children. the judge citing her reckless behavior and lack of accountability as grounds for the decision. Her accomplice, Jenny, faced her own repercussions. Her reputation tarnished and her friendships fractured. As we left the courtroom, reporters swarmed Amy, their cameras flashing and their questions relentless. "How do you feel about losing custody of your children?" One asked. "Do you regret your actions?" Another pressed. Amy's composure finally cracked. She lashed out, shouting obscenities and pushing a camera away, her outburst captured by every lens in the room. Minutes later, she was escorted away in handcuffs, her arrest only adding to the public spectacle of her downfall. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the bittersweet mix of emotions that consumed me. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication. The truth had come to light, and Amy's betrayal was no longer a shadow looming over me in silence. On the other hand, the victory felt hollow. No amount of evidence or courtroom triumph could erase the pain of what had happened or restore the trust that had been destroyed. My focus shifted to our children, who deserved stability and love despite the chaos that had unfolded. I poured my energy into creating a safe, nurturing environment for them, determined to shield them from the fallout of their mother's actions. Emily and Ethan were my anchors, their laughter and resilience a reminder of what truly mattered. As for Amy, she continued to reach out, her attempts at reconciliation ringing hollow in the wake of her actions. Each apology felt more like an attempt to salvage her image than a genuine expression of remorse. I knew then that forgiveness, while possible in time, would never mean forgetting. It would never mean returning to the life we once had. The judge's ruling in my favor marked the beginning of the end for Amy's stark, irreversible turn in a story that had once promised love and partnership. The prenuptial agreement, which Amy's mother had insisted upon all those years ago, now stood as an unyielding safeguard, ensuring that the financial stability of our children and me remained intact. While the legal victory provided a semblance of justice, it did little to ease the emotional toll of the entire ordeal. The court's decision to grant me full custody of Emily and Ethan was both a relief and a heavy responsibility. The judge had cited Amy's deceit and reckless behavior as evidence of her inability to provide a stable environment for the children. While I was grateful for the opportunity to shield them from further turmoil, I couldn't ignore the ache in my heart at the thought of what this would mean for their relationship with their mother. Emily, now old enough to sense the gravity of the situation, had become quieter in recent weeks. Her once vivid paintings, filled with bright colors and whimsical scenes, had turned darker and more abstract. Ethan, too young to fully grasp the complexities of what was happening, clung to me more than ever, his innocent questions about why Mommy wasn't coming home cutting through me like a knife. "Did I do something wrong, Dad?" he asked one evening, his big, curious eyes searching mine for answers. It took every ounce of strength I had to reassure him, to hold him close and promise that none of this was his fault. Amy's fall from grace was as public as it was painful. As she left the courthouse that day, the swarm of reporters waiting outside descended upon her like vultures. Microphones were thrust in her face, cameras flashing relentlessly as they bombarded her with questions. "How do you feel about losing custody of your children? Do you have anything to say about the evidence presented against you? Do you regret your actions?" Her initial response was to shield her face with her hands, her usual poise replaced by an uncharacteristic vulnerability. But as the questions grew more pointed, her composure crumbled. "Get that camera out of my face," she shouted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. She shoved one of the microphones away, causing it to clatter to the ground. The scene quickly escalated. Amy lashed out, her frustration boiling over into a physical altercation with one of the reporters. Police officers, stationed nearby to maintain order, intervened, restraining her as she continued to shout and struggle. The cameras captured every second of the spectacle. The footage later plastered across news channels and social media, cementing her disgrace in the court of public opinion. Her arrest that day became a symbol of the chaos she had brought into her own life, a stark contrast to the poised and ambitious woman I had once fallen in love with. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy for Emily, Ethan, and myself. The house, once filled with memories of happier times, now felt like a hollow shell. I began the arduous process of decluttering not just physically, but emotionally. Photographs of Amy were packed away, her belongings boxed and stored in the garage. It was a symbolic gesture as much as a practical one, a way of creating space for a new chapter to begin. Emily and Ethan struggled in their own ways, their reactions to the upheaval reflecting their unique personalities. Emily sought solace in her art, spending hours in her room sketching and painting. One day, I found a drawing she had left on the kitchen table, a portrait of our family, but with Amy's figure faint and faded, as if she were already slipping into the background of her young mind. Ethan, on the other hand, became more attached to me than ever. He followed me around the house, asking endless questions about everything from his favorite cartoons to the stars in the night sky. I welcomed the distraction, even as my heart ached for the innocence that had been stolen from him. To help them navigate their emotions, I arranged for family counseling sessions. Our therapist, a kind and empathetic woman named Dr. Harris, provided a safe space for us to process our feelings. She helped Emily articulate her confusion and anger, and encouraged Ethan to express his fears through drawings and play. For me, the sessions were a lifeline, a chance to voice the pain I had buried deep inside and to find a way forward. Despite the humiliation she had faced, Amy didn't disappear entirely. She reached out in the weeks following the court ruling, her messages oscillating between tearful apologies and bitter accusations. One day, she would beg for forgiveness, promising to change and pleading for another chance. The next, she would lash out, accusing me of turning the children against her and painting herself as the victim of an unjust system. "Mark, I made a mistake," one message read. "But does that mean I should lose everything? Don't you think the kids deserve to have their mother in their lives?" Her words stirred a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a faint, lingering trace of the love I had once felt for her. But each attempt at reconciliation only served to remind me of the chasm that now separated us. Her apologies felt hollow, more focused on her own suffering than on the pain she had caused. I allowed her supervised visitation with the children, believing that they deserved to maintain some connection with their mother. But even these visits were fraught with tension. Amy's interactions with Emily and Ethan strained and awkward. It was clear that rebuilding their trust would be a long and difficult journey, as the months turned into years. The scars of Amy's betrayal began to fade, though they never disappeared entirely. I threw myself into my work and into being the best father I could be. Emily's paintings grew brighter again, her laughter returning in fits and starts. Ethan, ever curious and full of energy, began to thrive in the stability of our new routine. Through it all, I learned to forgive, not for Amy's sake, but for my own. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, nor did it mean opening the door for her to return. It meant letting go of the anger and bitterness that had threatened to consume me, and choosing instead to focus on the life I was building for myself and my children. Amy's story, once intertwined with mine, had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the consequences of choices made in moments of weakness. As for me, I found strength in the love of my children and the resilience that had carried us through the storm. Our family might not have been the one I had envisioned, but it was ours, and it was enough. The months that followed were a whirlwind of rebuilding and reflection. As a single parent, my focus shifted entirely to creating a stable and nurturing environment for Emily and Ethan. Morning routines became a cornerstone of our new life: breakfasts filled with laughter, school drop-offs accompanied by music playlists we curated together, and bedtime stories that soothed their restless hearts. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to stitch together a life where love and trust could flourish once more, free from the shadow of betrayal. Amy's repeated attempts to reconcile became a source of frustration rather than hope. Her apologies, though frequent, lacked the weight of genuine remorse. They felt performative, driven more by her embarrassment and a desire to rebuild her shattered reputation than by any understanding of the pain she had caused. Each message, each tearful voicemail, only solidified my resolve to move forward without her. Forgiveness became a concept I wrestled with daily. What does it truly mean to forgive someone who has so profoundly shattered your trust? Is it a gift you offer to the other person, or is it something you do for yourself, a way to let go of the bitterness and anger that threatens to consume you? These questions lingered like shadows in my mind, their answers elusive but essential. In time, I came to understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what had happened. It meant freeing myself from the grip of the past, allowing me to focus on the future I was building for my children and myself. It was a quiet, internal decision, a letting go, not for Amy, but for me. As I moved forward, I found strength in the lessons life had forced upon me. Trust, I learned, is not an uncheckable foundation, it is a delicate thread, woven through daily acts of honesty, respect, and care. When that thread is broken, rebuilding it requires time, effort, and a willingness from both sides to mend the damage. In Amy's case, that willingness was absent, and so the chapter of us had to close. If you've ever faced a betrayal like this, you know the road ahead isn't easy. But it's a road worth walking, a path toward rediscovery, growth, and a life where trust, though scarred, can still find a way to bloom. What would you have done in my situation? Is forgiveness truly possible when the heart has been so deeply wounded? Let's start a conversation. Maybe together, we can find the answers. This story is a reminder of the importance of trust and accountability in relationships. It's easy to dismiss small cracks as insignificant, but left unchecked, they can lead to irreparable damage. If you faced a similar situation, how did you navigate it? Let's start a conversation in the comments below. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more compelling tales. Together, let's explore the complexities of life, one story at a time.